I don't believe in ghosts, or at least I didn't. Not before that night. It started with a bottle of whiskey, 3 friends, and a Ouija board we found in an old thrift shop. You know how these things go, drunken bravado, cheap thrills, and the naive confidence that nothing bad could happen because none of us actually believed in spirits. It was my best friend, Jake, who brought up the idea. Come on, Alex, he slurred, nudging me with his elbow. We're in the perfect setting. Friday night, empty house, storm rolling in. How could we not do this? Hannah, his girlfriend, wasn't thrilled about it, but she played along. Then there was Eric. He was the skeptic of our group, always the logical one. It's just a board game, he scoffed, swirling his drink. Let's prove once and for all that this crap doesn't work. So we turned off the lights, lit some candles, and set the board down between us on the coffee table. The rain had started by then, soft at first, but growing heavier with each passing minute. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Perfect cliché. All right, Jake said, cracking his knuckles. Spirits of the dead. If you're here, give us a sign. Silence. Eric chuckled. Guess they're busy. Then the planchette moved. None of us were pushing it, at least that's what we all swore. It glided slowly to the word yes. I felt my stomach twist. The air in the room felt wrong, heavier, like we weren't alone anymore. Who are we talking to? Hannah whispered. The planchette slid again. 1 letter at a time. Jonas, Jonas. Jake muttered. All right, Jonas, what do you want? The planchette moved faster now, spelling out a message. Let me in. A shiver ran down my spine. That's creepy. Eric grinned, unfazed. Okay, Jonas. You got an invitation. What now? Thunder roared outside. The candles flickered violently. And then the front door slammed open. The front door banged against the wall so hard I thought the glass would shatter. The 4 of us jumped, whipping our heads toward the entryway. Rain howled in through the open doorway, soaking the carpet, and for a second, I was sure I saw something. Someone. Standing just beyond the threshold. A tall, thin silhouette. Motionless. Watching. Then lightning flashed, and it was gone. Jesus Christ, Hannah gasped, clutching Jake's arm. What the hell was that? Wind, Eric said, but he didn't sound as confident as before. Jake shot me a look, trying to cover his nerves with a laugh. Damn, man, your house is really welcoming. I forced a chuckle, but my hands were sweating. The air felt different, thick like molasses. My gut screamed at me to shut the board, end the session, and burn the damn thing. But I didn't. Instead, I stood up and went to close the door. The storm had kicked up, leaves swirling in chaotic patterns on my front porch. My stomach tightened again as I peered out into the rain. There was nothing there, or at least nothing I could see. I locked the door. When I turned back, Eric had already put his hands on the planchette again. Dude, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Maybe we should stop. Eric smirked. What? You scared? No, but then sit down, he said, grinning. Let's see what Jonas has to say. Something in me hated this. Hated the way the board sat there, innocent and yet wrong. But I sat back down. Jonas, Eric said, moving the planchette in lazy circles. If you're still here, prove it. The pointer jerked hard and we all gasped. It shot across the board with a force I knew none of us could fake. It spelled out, I am here. A loud bang echoed through the house. It came from the hallway. Jake shot up. What the fuck was that? We all turned toward the hallway that led to my bedroom. The darkness there seemed thicker somehow, like it had depth beyond what should have been possible. Another bang, louder this time. Something was in my house. Hannah was shaking. Alex, do you have a bat or something? I didn't move. Couldn't. My legs felt numb. My mind was screaming at me to do something, but all I could do was stare into that darkness. Then soft, shuffling footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway. Something was walking toward us. The footsteps were slow, measured, like whatever was in the hallway wanted us to hear it coming. None of us moved. Jake's breathing turned shallow. That's gotta be bang. A door slammed somewhere down the hall. I swallowed, forcing my legs to work. I grabbed the closest thing to a weapon, an empty whiskey bottle, and stood up. My heart was hammering, but I tried to sound steady. Eric put the board away. Now, Eric hesitated. His cocky smirk was gone, replaced with something else. Something close to fear. Dude, this isn't thud. The sound was closer this time, just a few feet inside the hallway. Eric shut the board, shoving it into its box. The moment he did, the room felt lighter, but whatever we'd invited in wasn't leaving. Fuck this, Jake whispered. He grabbed Hannah's hand and pulled her toward the front door. We're out. Alex, come on. I should have gone with them. I should have. But something kept me rooted in place. Because I could see it now. A shape, just at the edge of the darkness. Not a person. Not an animal. Something wrong. It was tall, unnaturally tall. Its head nearly scraping the ceiling. Its limbs were too long, bending at angles that didn't make sense. It stood just outside the candlelight, like it couldn't step forward, like something was keeping it back. Then it moved. Not forward, but closer. Its body stretched, its limbs pulling longer as it leaned out of the hallway. No face, just a shifting void where its features should have been. And then it smiled. Not with a mouth. No, it had no mouth. But I felt it smile, like the room itself was grinning at me. A whisper filled my ears, soft and wet, like breath against my skin. Let me in. I fucking ran. I sprinted for the door so fast I nearly crashed into Jake and Hannah. Go, go, I yelled, fumbling with the lock. My fingers were slick with sweat. My brain screamed that it was behind me, reaching, stretching, but the door wouldn't budge. It's locked, Jake shouted, yanking on the handle. I know that. I snapped, twisting the knob with all my strength. Nothing. It was like the door had fused shut. The air behind me grew colder. Closer. Hannah was crying, shaking Jake's arm. Do something. Eric was the only one who hadn't moved. He stood frozen by the Ouija board, staring down the hallway where it still lurked. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He was staring at something. I turned. The thing in the hallway was closer now, right at the edge of the candlelight. Its shape twitched, flickering in and out of focus, like my eyes refused to understand what I was looking at. Its arms, its fingers longer than before, and it was waiting, not moving, not attacking, just waiting. Then the whisper came again. Let me in. I felt those words inside me, like a cold finger running down my spine, curling into my gut. Eric took a step forward. Eric, don't, I choked out. But he wasn't listening. His face was blank, his pupils blown wide, his breath slow and steady like he was somewhere else. His foot crossed the edge of the candlelight. The thing reached for him. I grabbed Eric's shirt and yanked him back with everything I had. The second his body hit the floor, every candle in the room went out. The second the candles died, the room plunged into complete darkness. Not the kind where your eyes adjust after a few seconds. This was absolute. A thick, smothering blackness that swallowed everything. And in that darkness, I heard it. Breathing. Slow. Ragged. Right next to my ear. I shoved myself backward, scrambling across the floor, knocking over the Ouija board in the process. Eric was gasping, choking on air like he'd just been pulled out of deep water. Jake? Hannah's voice trembled. Where are you? I'm right here, Jake said. But his voice was wrong. It was his voice, but off, like someone else was wearing it. Then the whisper returned. Let me in. A hand grabbed my ankle. As cold. Fingers impossibly long, wrapping around like a vice. I kicked, screaming, but it wouldn't let go. Turn on the lights. I shrieked. Hannah fumbled for her phone. The screen flashed on, dim but enough to cut through the darkness. The second the light hit my leg, the grip vanished. But there was something else. The hallway. The thing wasn't there anymore. Where is it? Jake shouted. Eric pointed, his hand trembling. It's everywhere. And I saw what he meant. The shadows on the walls. They weren't just shadows anymore. They were moving, writhing, crawling up the walls, stretching across the ceiling like black veins. The whole house was breathing. and then the kitchen light flicked on by itself, and it was standing right beneath it. For the first time, I saw it in the light. It was so much worse. The thing was tall, but wrongly tall. Its body stretched like something had tried to make a human shape and failed. Its arms reached almost to the floor, the fingers unnaturally sharp, curled inward like claws. Its skin wasn't really skin. It was shifting, rippling, like smoke trapped inside a body. Its face was still a void, an empty, grinning absence, and it was staring right at me. Eric whimpered, "Don't look at it," took a step forward, and the lights exploded. Glass shattered as every light bulb in the house exploded at once. Hannah screamed, and Jake yanked her down, shielding her as shards rained over us. Then silence. No more whispers, no more movement, just the suffocating dark. My ears rang. My breathing was too loud, too fast. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I knew. If I made the wrong move, it would be my last. Then I heard it. Not a whisper this time. A low, guttural chuckle, coming from Eric. I turned my phone's flashlight toward him, and my stomach dropped. Eric was smiling. Not a normal smile. His lips were stretched too wide, teeth clenched together in a sick, unnatural grin. His pupils were gone, just milky white orbs staring into nothing. His body sat unnaturally still, hands resting perfectly on his knees. He wasn't blinking. "Eric?" I whispered. His head twitched violently to the side, like a puppet whose strings had been yanked. Then, in a voice that wasn't his, he spoke. "I am in." The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath came out in a fog. Hannah was crying, clinging to Jake, but none of us moved. Eric, or whatever was inside Eric, tilted his head, eyes rolling to me. "You let me in." "No," I croaked. The grin stretched wider. "You called for me, and I came." Eric's body jerked forward, like something inside him was fighting against invisible strings. His fingers twitched. His shoulders rolled. Then, so fast it barely registered, he lunged at me. I barely got out of the way in time. His body hit the floor with a sickening thud, but he moved too fast, crawling on all fours, limbs bending at grotesque angles. "Get the board," Jake yelled. I scrambled toward the overturned Ouija board, fingers fumbling as I flipped it back upright. Eric screeched. Not a human sound. Not anything that should come from a person. His back arched, and he slammed his hands against the floor, hard enough to rattle the walls. Jake grabbed the planchette and shoved it onto the board. "Say goodbye." I slapped my hand on it. Hannah did too. "Goodbye," I yelled. Nothing happened. Eric laughed. Again. Jake roared. "Goodbye." The second time, the house shook. A gust of freezing air blasted through the room. Eric's body convulsed, his mouth stretching open like his jaw was about to split in two. Then the lights flickered back on, and Eric collapsed. For a long, horrible moment, none of us moved. The only sound was our ragged breathing, the quiet hum of the fridge, the rain still tapping against the windows. Then Eric gasped, sucking in air like a drowning man breaking the surface. He looked up at me, and he started sobbing. I knew then we weren't alone anymore. We never had been, and we never would be again. Eric sobbed so hard his whole body shook. His hands clutched his chest like he was trying to hold something inside, like whatever had crawled into him was still scratching at his ribs, looking for a way back out. None of us spoke. None of us could. I just sat there, heart still pounding, watching as Eric gasped for breath between choked-out whimpers. He looked wrong. His skin, normally tan, had gone pale and sickly. His lips were cracked. His eyes darted around the room, still too wide, like he was seeing something the rest of us couldn't. Jake reached out hesitantly. "Dude!" Eric flinched. Hard. He crawled backward, his movements jerky and unnatural. "No," he rasped, shaking his head. "No, no, no, no." "Eric, it's okay," Hannah whispered. Eric's bloodshot eyes snapped to hers. "It's not okay." His voice cracked, breaking into something raw. "It's still here." A cold weight settled in my gut. The house was silent now. No more whispers. No more flickering lights. The board sat undisturbed on the table, the planchette resting over goodbye. But Eric still wasn't blinking. His pupils trembled, dilating and shrinking like his brain couldn't decide whether it was in the dark or not. His breath hitched. He rocked slightly, his arms wrapped tight around his torso. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "I can still hear it." Hannah let out a quiet sob. "Eric," Jake said, voice tight, "you're scaring the shit out of us, man." Eric let out a wet, broken laugh. "I'm scaring you?" His fingers dug into his arms so hard I thought he might tear into his own skin. "It's inside me, Alex." His head snapped toward me so fast I recoiled. "I can feel it, crawling, whispering." His voice dropped to a whisper. Laughing. The room felt colder again. Not as bad as before. Not that bone-deep, ice-in-your-lungs cold. But enough to make the hairs on my arms stand up. "Maybe we should take him to a hospital," Hannah said, voice shaking. Eric started laughing again. It was a dry, brittle sound, full of something awful. "You think doctors can fix this?" He clutched his head, fingers tangling in his hair. "You think they'll look at my fucking brain and be like, 'Oh, there's your problem. You've got a goddamn demon in there.'" No one answered. Eric's chest rose and fell in uneven bursts. His lips trembled. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and whispered, "You let it in, Alex." A cold shiver crawled up my spine. Jake stepped in. "All right, enough of this. We need to knock, knock, knock." All of us froze. Came from the front door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. No one moved. No one breathed. Hannah grabbed Jake's arm. My throat went dry. I turned my head toward the door, pulse thudding in my ears. It was almost 3 a.m. No one should be here. No one should know we were here. Knock, knock, knock. This time the door creaked. Something was pressing against it. I felt it. We all did. A weight, presence. A voice slithered through the wood, so quiet I barely heard it. "Let me in." No one moved. No one spoke. We just stared at the door, our bodies frozen, our breath caught in our throats. The air felt thick again, suffocating, like we were sealed inside a vacuum where even time had stopped. Then knock, knock, knock. The doorknob twisted. "Don't open it," Eric croaked. His voice was hoarse, like something had been clawing its way up his throat. Jake shook his head furiously. "No shit, dude." Hannah was crying now, silent but uncontrollable, her fingers digging into Jake's sleeve. The knob twisted again, harder this time, and then a voice. Not a whisper anymore. This was different. This was my voice. "Alex, let me in." I felt my stomach drop. The words slithered through the wood, soft but insistent, coated in something oily and wrong. Jake whipped his head toward me, his face pale. "Dude, what the fuck?" "It's not me," I whispered. Another knock, more forceful this time. "Alex, please, open the door." The way it spoke, calm, familiar, coaxing. It sent a deep, primal terror through my bones, like an animal instinct kicking in, warning me that whatever was on the other side of that door wasn't human. Eric made a choked sound in his throat, his hands clutching his temples. "It's inside me," he muttered. "It's inside me, it knows how we think." Then the voice changed. Jake stiffened. "I know you can hear me. Just open the door, man. It's okay." It sounded exactly like me. My tone, my inflection, like I was standing on the other side, asking to be let in. But I was right here. Jake's grip tightened around Hannah's hand. He was shaking. "Hannah," the thing cooed. "Don't you want to go home? Just open the door. Step outside." Hannah let out a broken sob. The doorknob rattled harder, shaking violently, like whatever was out there was getting impatient. Then Eric screamed. He collapsed, hands clutching his skull, his whole body spasming like he was being ripped apart from the inside. "It's not gone," he choked. "It's still here. It never left." Jake grabbed my arm. "We need to go." "The door." "Not that way." His eyes darted toward the back of the house. "The garage. We can get out through the side door." We didn't hesitate. We ran. Eric was barely conscious, half supported by Jake as we dragged him toward the garage. The knocks grew louder, more aggressive, like the thing knew we were trying to escape. Then the front door handle snapped. We threw ourselves into the garage. Jake fumbled for the light switch. It flickered on just as the front door slammed open. We didn't look back. I fumbled with the garage side door, hands slick with sweat. It wouldn't budge. "Come on, come on," I hissed, jiggling the handle. Behind us, Eric let out a strangled gasp. Then, barely above a whisper, "It's here." Jake and I turned. Eric was standing now, but his head was tilted back, his mouth open in a silent scream. His eyes were rolled back, showing only the whites. His fingers twitched at his sides. And his shadow wasn't his. It was taller, twisting, writhing, smiling. Then Eric spoke. But it wasn't his voice anymore. "You should have let me in." The garage light shattered. The garage light exploded, plunging us into darkness. I felt something move. Not footsteps, not breathing, something else. A shift in the air. A silent, predatory glide. And Eric wasn't Eric anymore. That thing wearing his body stood in the dark, its outline barely visible against the faint glow of the streetlight leaking in through the garage window. Too tall, too rigid. Its shadow twisted unnaturally behind it, stretching across the walls like it had too many limbs. Then it laughed. A slow, crackling sound that sent a wave of cold through my body. "You should have let me in," it repeated, voice thick with something inhuman. Hannah screamed. Jake shoved me toward the side door. "Get it open." I yanked at the handle, slamming my shoulder into the wood. Nothing. It was like the door had been welded shut. Behind us, Eric, or what used to be Eric, took a step forward. I heard the bones in his legs crack as he moved. "Eric," I gasped. "If you're in there, fight it." His head twitched violently. For a moment, his eyes flickered back to normal. His lips trembled. His whole body shook like something was struggling to take back control. Then his mouth opened, and in a voice barely above a whisper, he choked out, "Run." Then his face twisted into a wide, grinning void, and he lunged. Jake grabbed the nearest thing, a rusted wrench from my dad's old toolbox, and swung it, connected with Eric's temple. The force sent him staggering backward, slamming into the garage wall with a sickening thud. "Go!" Jake roared. I grabbed Hannah and kicked at the side door with everything I had. Wood splintered, the lock snapped, and the door burst open. We ran, out into the rain, into the cold, into the empty street that had never felt so unnaturally silent. I didn't look back, didn't check if it was following, didn't care. We ran until our lungs burned, until our legs screamed for us to stop, until we were standing on the porch of a neighbor's house, banging on the door, screaming for help. Lights flicked on inside. A porch light glowed, and for the first time I felt like maybe we had actually escaped. Then Hannah gasped, gripping my arm so hard it hurt. I turned, and my stomach dropped. Back at my house, through the rain, through the open garage door. I saw him, Eric, standing in the doorway, watching, smiling, and then he raised a hand and waved. We stood frozen on the neighbor's porch, soaked in rain and terror. The door behind us swung open, an older man squinting into the night. "What the hell is going on?" he grumbled. I tried to speak, but my throat was locked. My mind was screaming. "Tell him, get inside, call the police." But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because Eric was still there, standing in the open garage, smiling, waving. But it wasn't Eric. Not anymore. The thing inside him cocked its head, like it was curious, amused. Then, slowly, deliberately, it lifted one finger to its lips. A silent command. "H-H-H-H." Then, right in front of us, Eric stepped backward into the dark and disappeared. The garage door slammed shut on its own. And just like that, he was gone. The police came. They searched the house. No sign of Eric. No sign of anything out of the ordinary. The Ouija board was gone. The broken glass, the blood on the floor, it was like none of it had ever happened. I told them everything anyway. About the board. The knocks. The thing that spoke in our voices. They didn't believe me. No one did. In the end, they labeled Eric as a missing person. His disappearance made the news. His parents begged for information. Flyers went up. But deep down I knew. Eric wasn't missing. He was still here. Somewhere. Watching. Waiting. And the worst part? I never closed the door. Not really. Because every night, just as I'm about to fall asleep, I hear it. The whisper. The same two words. Let me in. The end.